Hello, everyone. Dr. Eames here. This time I'd like to talk about marketing research. What we find is marketing research is simply about gathering the data we need, analyzing it, and turning it into useful information so that we can make some decisions. And that's one thing to remember. That data is simply raw facts and figures, and it's not really information until we put some analysis to it. And we have to do that when we're marketers to find out what are the conditions that will motivate and inspire consumers. How can we engage with them? How can we indeed uh, get into their awareness so that they can work with us and we can make a sale or provide a service or something like that. Um, and so we have to do our marketing research. It also helps us keep up with best practices and do the things that are necessary in the marketplace to be successful. So when we're gathering this marketing information, we have primary and secondary sources. So let's get into talking about what are these types of information. Well, first you can see here that primary sources are situations where we get direct information. It's not somebody talking about something that somebody else has already looked at or an analysis of some previous information. It is the actual generation of that information. And so it is primary in that sense. So we can do interviews. And interviews certainly are a way to connect with people. You can talk face to face in an interview. You can get tone of voice, inflection. You can ask follow-up questions. You can see body language and so forth. So interviews are a fantastic source and a solid source of getting the very primary information because you're getting it original. We can do the same thing with a survey. A survey obviously is an instrument you send out to collect information. People respond to it, you look at it, you analyze the data that you're seeing and try and make some sense of that information. We can also do observation, depending on the circumstance. We can observe people interacting with the product. We can observe people interacting with the service. We can analyze that information that we gather and so forth and see if it helps us improve what we're doing. Focus groups is another way to get primary source material. It's really a panel interview when we do a focus group. So you get a of people together to talk about one issue. These focus groups can be handled in various ways, but the idea is you get a collective sense from a lot of different people who are interested in either the product or the service, and you get their opinions and you can get some discussion going. And indeed, you can find out some very interesting and useful things about what you might need to do with your marketing promotion. Remember, that's why we're doing the marketing research, so that we can design a promotion that furthers our brand image, that pushes forward our product and or our service and all of that stuff. Surveys don't have to be in person. Sometimes you can do these in person. You can hand out surveys and so forth. But today it is so much easier to do these online. You can reach a greater amount of people and so forth. So you can put them on your website, on your Facebook page. It's all sorts of ways that you can initiate these online surveys. Questionnaires and surveys are kind of the same thing, really. Questionnaires might be a little briefer. I might have a lot more dichotomous questions. In other words, you get a yes or a no answer versus a survey, which you might be able to get some open-ended responses on, which you, of course, would spend more time analyzing. You certainly want customer comments whenever you can get them. So your customer service ought to have some component that gets a survey from consumers. You get their reactions, what they think of the product, the quality, the service, the timeliness, all of those things. And we can find out an awful lot from customer comments. And sometimes we don't gather that information ourselves. We get it off of uh, online. People post comments on your website about a product or a service, and these are valuable sources of primary information. You're getting directly what people think, not what someone says about what they think. And then certainly if you get a written letter or a text or an email from consumers or your customer, that is considered similar to an interview. It's direct, it's a primary source of material, and you can find so much out when people write you letters and so forth and let you know what they're thinking. So primary sources, whenever we get them, are the most powerful, but we do have to analyze them and turn that data into some useful information. Now, certainly it's much easier to use secondary sources, and I would say certainly that there is a lot more secondary information out there, just depending on where you're looking. And here are the different types of secondary sources. The government in particular publishes all kinds of information, not just uh, publications and reports, but ongoing databases that you can access at any given time and find out some relevant information. For instance, the census will have a website, and you can go back and get all kinds of historical information, or you can get the most up-to-date information in many categories. Um, and so these things are really valuable out there. Commercial publications are put out by companies and think tanks and all kinds of management consulting firms and so forth. Some cost to access, others are free. You just have to search them out. These would be terrific sources of information. They analyze primary sources and they tell you what was actually happening. So if there was, say, a research project of some type, that would be considered primary information, but a commercial publication that talks about that research and what they found would be here, and it would be considered secondary because people are talking about it after the fact. And other places we can find this, of course, secondary sources, opinion pieces, maybe some research based on primary sources, magazines, newspapers. And then we get to the sort of internal versus external things. Internally, you have your own company records. You can look back in history and see how you've done over time. This would include your financial analysis in various areas, any other prior research reports that you've done that give you some insight would also be an internal source. These would be considered, depending on the instance, maybe some primary material occasionally, but it just depends on what you're looking at. But this is a valuable source within your company, maybe a commercial publication built on some other primary research or so forth. Now, general sources, this is where we use search engines. We go to the internet. There are different variety of search engines out there. Don't restrict yourself just to Google. Google is a great search engine, but it also has a lot of paid placement. So that means the top things in the list that you get when you query something are going to be things that were paid to be there and come up when that term was searched. So go to ask.com, and there are others and so forth that you can use on various websites. Yahoo has a search feature in its finance area and so forth. And there are all sorts of commercial databases. Sometimes these are provided by educational institutions like colleges and so forth. And other times you can just find them out there, put out by companies along with their commercial publications and things like that. So we are awash in a whole amount of secondary source material. Now the problem becomes here with secondary source material is a lot of it is opinion, and a lot of it would not be considered research. So you have to be careful when you quote it and use it and so forth, and make sure it's actually accurate, that the sources know what they're talking about. So you've got to look to the credibility of these people and to these sources. So when we collect primary data, the interview, for instance, this is not always easy to get people to agree to spend the time to sit with you for whatever length of time you tell them it's going to take and do a personal interview. It is a fantastic way to gather primary data. And when we do this, when we interview or we do an observation, we're really performing qualitative research. You can't find out everything you need in a survey. You can't find out about people's feelings. How can you find out the depth of someone's feelings by going 1 through 5 on a choice on a survey? Somewhat agree, not agree. It would be better to get their actual words and what they think about it, opinions, values, and beliefs. And one way to get that is a qualitative approach, which is collecting data through interview. Now, those other approaches where we get statistical data, we run surveys and all that kind of thing, those are generally considered quantitative methods. So we use both quantitative and qualitative to collect our primary data and so forth. Let's finish this up with a little bit of information on the marketing research process itself. Basically, you do two things. You gather information, you find out where that information is, you analyze that data, make it useful information, and then you do just like you're solving a problem. You list all the alternatives and options you have to solve your problem, to meet the challenge, so to speak, and then you implement the best one. So you have to look at that data, whether it's primary or secondary. You've got to analyze it yourself. You cannot just necessarily accept the word and secondary data of what people think something means. But if you look at 4 or 5 or half a dozen sources that all talk about that primary data, you can get some idea that, okay, here's what a group of people who have analyzed the data think about. And that will give you what we say here is a more honest, careful interpretation of that data that we turn into information. So once we've done that background research, we set ourselves up for success. We pick the solution or the way to move forward that seems the best for us. We implement it, and then finally, as time passes and it is implemented, we gather information about how we're doing. We measure it against the goals we've set. Did we accomplish what we said we wanted to do? And is it in a situation where, well, we've decided that we realize we don't know enough and we haven't done enough research? There's no problem with going back and doing a little more research to make sure that you made the right decisions and to really make sure that you implement properly. Okay, folks, that's what I wanted to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again soon.